National Executive Committee meeting to deliberate on which party or which parties it will enter into coalition governments with. Treasurer General Paul Mashatile met with the EFF until the early hours of this morning. The IFP has refused to work with the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal only, but the door is open in the other provinces.
Essentially, what is happening here is that the ANC has convened a special NEC meeting as opposed to a special extended NWC meeting. So they are having a special National Executive Committee meeting to speak about the outcomes of the recent local government elections and also to get an update from the ANC's coalition team, which is chaired by the Treasurer General Paul Mashatile and the Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte, who did meet with the economic freedom fighters last night in a meeting that deadlocked in the early hours of the morning, where the EFF was saying that in order for them to give the ANC power in certain municipalities, the ANC also has to vote with the EFF in certain municipalities for the EFF to get its own mayors, its own MMCs, and to have full responsibility of governance within that specific municipality, and the ANC would sit in the legislature or the council and hold the EFF government accountable on that particular council that the ANC would vote at the EFF, and vice versa, where the ANC is voted in by the EFF in their coalition agreement. The EFF would form part of the council or the legislature and hold the ANC accountable in oversight work. So in essence, the ANC NEC, there are some within the Special National Executive Committee meeting of the ANC who are for a coalition of the ANC with the Democratic Alliance, and some with the ANC in a coalition with the Economic Freedom Fighters, and also a third view of ANC going with smaller parties, and a fourth view where the ANC would sit in the opposition benches and not contest any of these council meetings. So in essence, they are deliberating coalitions, but interestingly, the IFP having their briefing at about 1 o'clock this afternoon, saying and making it categorically clear that they would not enter into a coalition in any form with the African National Congress in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. They are willing to speak and engage with the ANC and enter into a coalition with the ANC in all other provinces in the country except in KwaZulu-Natal, due to the historical relations of the party, and especially with that book written by the ANC stalwart and former journalist Mzala Ngumalo, which has irked the IFP President Emeritus Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. That book titled Kacha Buthelezi, the Chief with a Double Agenda, which is in essence why the IFP is saying they can't enter into a coalition with the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, and saying the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal is very dishonest and has never kept its word on the previous engagements and agreements between the two parties.
We're still in the process of discussing. Obviously, there's still a long list of people who want to talk. But the direction in which the discussion is taking is that the negotiating team of the ANC is being given a mandate to talk to any political party that will talk to us. So that we open the door. So we open the door to talk to anyone who will talk to us. In the concept of trying to form partnerships or formal coalitions if we need to. And we gave a report to the NEC of who we had discussed with thus far, but we also need to indicate that talks are still in the making. We've made no arrangement, no agreement with anyone.
For more on the meeting, we're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. He is on Zoom. Professor, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and a warm welcome to the Globe.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Well, this must be a very, very important meeting for the ANC, especially taking place after the party has suffered some worrying losses, isn't it? I mean, for the party to have postponed the very crucial National Working Committee meeting and focused on the meeting that will see the deliberations on the coalition government. So it really is a crucial meeting there, isn't it?
Yes, that is indeed so. And I think there's, over and above the discussion about the coalitions and the mandate that they will give to the negotiating team, I think they must have also had given some attention to the election campaign as well as the election results. Given the nature of the ANC's decline, and I think it's inevitable that they have to discuss it. I think later on there will be a more detailed analysis of the election results. In the past, they had a special unit under Tony True in order to analyze it. I don't know who's at the moment involved in it, but that's the way in which they normally do it. So they will have quite a detailed analysis of the results. But for now, because there's limited time in order to form the coalitions, in total it will be 14 days after the election results were announced, and that was Thursday. So it's about 10 days left in order to negotiate the coalition agreements. And therefore, that will receive their priority at the moment.
You know, Prof, I've heard from some quarters that there's an insinuation doing the rounds within the ANC circles that this is the first and perhaps the biggest political losses the ANC has suffered in its history under President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration. I suppose then that the party knows that this is not the time to be playing the blame games and time for political factions. So should any known faction from inside the ANC be worried when the top brass comes together at this very crucial time?
Well, I think the leadership under President Ramaphosa will try their utmost best in order to avoid that it becomes acrimonious internal debate about who must take the blame for this. Is it going to be Fikile Mbalula, who was the election manager of the ANC's election campaign? Is it the president himself, or who must take the blame? Is it the top six, or is it the NEC? And that can become a very debilitating debate. So I think they will try to avoid that from happening, and rather say, first of all, let's concentrate on forming coalitions in which we will be in the best possible position, and then start to prepare for the 2024 election, because it's only 2.5 years from now. And that is going to be an absolutely decisive moment for them with that election. If the trends that we've seen now with this election, which actually started in 2019, many of the losses that the ANC suffered now actually happened already at provincial level in 2019, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. So I think they want to try to break this trend that has now developed over 2 elections.
This must be a very difficult time for the African National Congress, isn't it? Because now they have to swallow their pride and start looking into negotiation and maybe getting into bed with some of the parties that they don't see eye to eye with when it comes to ideological policies and parties that have had vast differences with in the past. And for instance, the HNSA says that they're not willing to work with the ANC under any circumstances, and the IFP has come out to say that they're not willing to work with the ANC, but only in KwaZulu-Natal. Well, probably the door is still open for the IFP in the other provinces. So is there any other party that the ANC can convince going forward to form a coalition government with in the hung municipalities?
You know, I would take quite a pinch of salt these statements that are made at the moment. It's still relatively early in the negotiation process. And the very nature of negotiating coalitions is that you must be relatively open-minded. You can't preclude options, because you can very likely you can land in a position where the figures, the results, the percentages are going to dictate what the options are. And it's not that it's by choice, but it's that it is the only option that's available. So I would be, if I'm a political party involved in a political party, be very hesitant to make statements like this. I think what we are seeing at the moment is sort of positional statements. It's about where the parties start from. It's their first position. We call it in political science positional negotiation, but it is just the starting point. It's like trade unions who start with a demand of 15% and they end up with 4%. The same type of logic is going to apply here also, where ultimately the parties are going to move towards a common position, which will be some form of compromise. And in some cases, they are going to work together with parties that they actually precluded from the list initially. But the dynamics of the negotiations and of the options that become available for them will actually, in the end, dictate how these coalitions will be formed. It's very much about strategy and tactics. It's about which one it can sort of outmaneuver other political parties. And the combination of parties is obviously absolutely crucial. And also the options that are available. So I won't pay very much attention now to parties making statements of saying, well, I'm willing to negotiate with this one, but not with the other party.
I want us to focus a bit more, Prof, on the dynamics of the negotiations that we've just made, just a short while ago. We know that the Democratic Alliance has historically been a thorn in the flesh for the ANC, in the past elections, in the past decades, being the official opposition, in the country's politics. So now that both parties do not see eye to eye, well, the Democratic Alliance has indicated that they are willing to work with the ANC. I mean, they're still open to negotiations with the ANC. And being it the official opposition, I mean, this is totally unprecedented, or it totally will be unprecedented should the ANC decide to work with the Democratic Alliance. So in terms of the dynamics of the negotiation, so what do you suggest that these parties should start working towards? Is it about principle, the fact that both parties differ vastly in terms of ideology and principle, or is it simply about the delivery of services to its people?
Well, it's a combination of what you are saying, and that is why this is such a fluid situation. It's not something that you can purely based on principles.
Yes.
Because, as I've said, very often it's about the situation of which combinations can take you past the point of 50% plus one.
Right.
That is what dictates everything. Thereafter is which of these combinations can be the best. It will be the most productive. It's the most feasible, where the parties can come together. But I will give you another example, which is not in South Africa, and that is Germany, where they have, since the end of the Second World War, always had only coalition governments. They never had a situation where one party governed. And in some cases, in the last two elections, before this latest election, they couldn't form coalitions with smaller parties. And in the end, the two big parties, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, had no option but to come together. Now, that's similar to the ANC and the DA in South Africa. And during these 10 years, the German coalitions worked actually very well. And look where Germany is today.
Yes.
So I think one should be open-minded about what are the possibilities. And I'll take it for granted that the negotiators are also ultimately quite pragmatic in how they are going to approach these negotiations. Both parties had some experience now, the DA maybe more even, of how the coalitions work and the dynamics of that, and what to look out for and what to try to avoid. And I think this is, given the history, it's possibly going to assist them in these negotiations. I think what will happen that in the first option will be for the big parties to look for smaller partners. And if they cannot get past the 50% plus one with the smaller parties, if there are not enough of them, and for example, I've listened to you about Inkatha, the IFP,
yes,
in eThekwini, they simply, together with the other parties, the DA and the EFF, don't have enough support in order to get close to the 50% plus one. So they have to think about other alternatives also. The same is going to be the case in, especially in Nelson Mandela Bay, where the ANC and the DA has exactly the same number of seats in the council. And so it's going to be a question of combinations that determine one who can take or form the coalition. So it's a period of innovative thinking, of strategic thinking, and not of limiting your options in the beginning. Maybe towards the end it can play a role, but certainly not in the beginning.
And the outcome of this election, Prof, points to an unhappy voter population. Any key lessons the ANC can learn from its dismal performance?
Yes, this is certainly a strong message for not only the ANC. I think all the main parties, the three main parties, actually have to learn a lesson, because none of the three actually did well. That includes the EFF. They grew only with 2% since the 2016 election, and the DA, especially in a province like the Western Cape, they now have to deal with twice the number of hung municipalities than that of 2016. It increased from 8 to 16. So it means that they lost their outright majority in the smaller towns in the Western Cape quite significantly. So it's a message, I think, for all the parties, and it is a message for parties to take note of what, for example, was reported by the Afrobarometer about trust in institutions and including the institutions of political parties, parliament, the president, and politicians. And the level of trust is very low in South Africa at the moment.
Yeah.
So it means all those involved in the political system must have a serious relook at where are they and how do they relate, especially to the public or the voters in general.
As I said earlier, Prof, I mean, there's a blame game being at play here with some within the ANC blaming the Ramaphosa administration for the party's dismal performance and some voices within the party calling for Ramaphosa's removal. The big question is, can they win? Will they win? And if so, what is at stake for South Africa as a country and the ANC as a party if Ramaphosa goes?
Yeah, first of all, I think there's almost no chance that they will be able to remove President Ramaphosa. He is, whether they like it or not, in a very strong position in the ANC. Now, it's a president in the ANC or a president only becomes vulnerable in the last about 2 years of his or her term. And that is when the combination of the ANC presidency and the national presidency becomes split. And that's after the last ANC's national conference, when normally a new ANC president is elected, but the old president is still the national president. And we've seen in the case of both President Mbeki and President Zuma, it's during that time that they were ultimately forced out of their positions. So for now, for the foreseeable future, and definitely for next year's national conference of the ANC, there's no real opportunity, I would say, to threaten his position. The opposition is maybe there, but they are diffused. It's not in a very organized fashion that they exist within the ANC. And there's just simply, if you look at it, if you move very close to the ANC, the aura, the authority associated with the president cannot be contested. I mean, that is just, there is no level playing ground in order for other senior persons within the ANC to do that. And these opponents are not in senior positions in the ANC. It looks more like they are shopping around to find who can stand against him in next year's election. But that's not creating or cultivating a strong campaign at this point in time. So I don't think this is therefore a possibility. We can't afford a party that is, at least for another 2 years, the governing party to become dysfunctional, because it will affect all of us. So it's one can't wish for the ANC now sort of start to fall apart. If they lose an election, that's a different case. But for now, I think all the parties, and that includes literally all the parties, must consolidate. They must come together. Many of them are going to form part of the local governments, and they must establish themselves so that the three spheres of government are all three actually functioning as effective as possible. And I think this is what the public in general expects, that ultimately they want to see the outputs, not what the political infighting is about, but what is the results of the delivery in terms of governance.
All right, Professor Dirk Kotze, lovely chatting to you as always. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
All right, thank you. That was Professor Dirk Kotze. He's a political analyst, and he's been sharing with us his sentiments on the ANC NEC meeting, which is currently in progress, that seeks to discuss the coalition governments in some of the hung municipalities that the party has lost in some provinces. This is the Global